Imagine a peaceful lakeside vacation instantly morphing into a bloody living hell. Before her friends can even scream, a twitching, possessed girl lunges forward and literally tears her cousin's scalp clean off her head. Then, with a demonic grin, she rips her boyfriend's head completely off his shoulders and slowly levitates right above the crimson water. But how this nightmare started will absolutely terrify you. To find out how a serene vacation turned into an absolute slaughterhouse, we have to travel back exactly 24 hours earlier, leaving the isolated lake behind for the claustrophobic, decaying concrete of a rundown apartment complex in Los Angeles. The building is a towering relic, condemned and practically abandoned. Here, we meet Beth, a road-weary guitar technician whose life has just been thrown into absolute chaos by a positive pregnancy test. Overwhelmed, isolated, and desperately seeking comfort, she turns to the only family she has left, her estranged older sister, Ellie. Ellie is a fiercely independent tattoo artist, doing her absolute best to raise 3 kids on her own in this crumbling building. The sensitive tech nerd Danny, the rebellious and fiercely protective Bridget, and little Cassie, an imaginative young girl who creates strange, macabre art dolls out of trash. The sisterly reunion is deeply strained but grounded in a profound, underlying affection. Ellie's husband has recently walked out on them, and the family is facing immediate eviction. The heavy walls of the apartment seem to close in on them, radiating a sense of quiet desperation. But as the sisters talk in the kitchen, trying to mend their broken bond, they have absolutely no idea that an ancient, unspeakable malice is lurking directly beneath their feet, waiting for the slightest crack in their reality to break through. The mundane struggles of the family are violently shattered in a matter of seconds. While Beth stays upstairs, Ellie sends the kids down to the building's subterranean parking garage to pick up pizza. It feels like a completely normal evening, until a massive, localized earthquake violently rocks the entire city of Los Angeles. The concrete garage floors buckle and rupture with a deafening roar, opening a terrifying, jagged chasm right beneath where the children are standing. As the dust settles, a dark, hidden chamber is exposed. A long-forgotten 1923 banking vault, buried deep beneath the building's foundation and sealed away for a century. Driven by a mix of teenage curiosity and sheer adrenaline, Danny decides to lower himself into the pitch-black abyss, ignoring Bridget's frantic warnings. Moving his flashlight across the dust-covered floor, he bypasses strange religious icons, crucifixes, and ancient artifacts, until his light lands on something deeply unsettling. Hidden away in a secret compartment are 3 heavy vintage phonograph records and a bizarre, ancient book. The tome is horrifying to look at. Bound entirely in preserved human skin, its pages locked shut by grotesque, jagged metallic claws that resemble teeth. Danny, thinking only of his family's desperate financial ruin, believes these rare artifacts could be their financial salvation. He wraps them up and secretly smuggles them up to his bedroom, entirely unaware that he has just unearthed a curse meant to stay buried forever. But what happens next will change everything. Upstairs, a heavy, unnatural silence blankets the apartment as the city's power grid fluctuates. Locked away in his room, Danny studies the macabre book. The metallic teeth securing the pages suddenly slide back with a sickening, wet click, as if tasting his presence, allowing the book to open. The pages inside are covered in horrifying, hand-drawn illustrations of anatomical mutilation and cryptic Latin texts written entirely in faded blood. This is the Naturum de Monto, the Book of the Dead. Intrigued and completely oblivious to the danger, Danny sets up his vintage turntable and plays the first of the 1923 phonograph records. The crackling, low-fidelity audio fills the bedroom with the voice of Father Thomas, an ancient priest who had been secretly researching the book. The priest's recorded voice grows increasingly frantic as he translates the text, detailing how this specific volume is one of 3 cursed books capable of summoning a legion of parasitic, body-snatching demons known as Deadites. Danny tries to stop the record, but a sudden, violent scratch locks the needle into a groove. The priest's voice distorts into a booming, deep cadence, chanting a forbidden demonic incantation. Instantly, the temperature in the apartment drops to freezing. The air grows incredibly thick. Down on a lower floor, Ellie enters the building's old industrial elevator. Suddenly, a roaring, invisible hurricane of pure malice blasts through the shaft. The sinister entity violently attacks Ellie, slamming her against the steel walls like a rag doll. Strips of thick, frayed elevator cables snap wildly, wrapping around her wrists and neck like living serpents, lifting her into the air before forcing their way directly down her throat in a horrific, agonizing possession. The elevator doors slowly slide open on the top floor, and Ellie stumbles out into the dim hallway. When she enters the apartment, the family immediately notices something is profoundly wrong. She moves with a stiff, robotic, unnatural gait, her skin deathly pale and her eyes completely bloodshot and glassy. Without saying a word to her terrified children, she walks straight into the kitchen, turns on the stove, and begins to fry eggs. But the horror intensifies as she starts aggressively smashing the raw eggs directly into the hot pan with her bare hands, crushing the shells into the yolk while laughing in a low, breathless hysteria. Beth tries to intervene, but Ellie suddenly turns around, her face twisting into a hideous, malicious grin. Her voice completely distorts, dropping into a deep, guttural, demonic growl that echoes off the walls. The loving mother is completely gone, replaced by a sadistic entity that launches a ferocious physical attack on her own family. She flings Beth across the room with superhuman strength, scaling the kitchen counters and mocking her children's terror. In a terrifying moment of clarity amidst the chaos, Ellie's voice shifts back to normal for just a brief second. She looks at Beth with profound sorrow, whispering that Mommy's with the maggots now, begging her sister to protect her babies. Then, her body undergoes a violent, bone-snapping seizure. Ellie collapses onto the floor, her eyes rolling into the back of her head, and she stops breathing entirely. She is dead, leaving the apartment echoing with a deafening, terrifying silence. The shock of Ellie's sudden death leaves the apartment in a state of absolute grief and panic. Hearing the chaotic screaming, a few terrified neighbors from the top floor, Mr. Fonda, Jake, and Scott, rush in to help. Together with Beth, they carefully lift Ellie's cold, lifeless body and move it into the back bedroom, laying her on the bed. Realizing they need professional medical help and police assistance, Beth tries to lead the children out of the building. But as they step into the hallway, they discover the terrifying reality of their isolation. The earlier earthquake didn't just crack the garage, it completely collapsed the building's central concrete stairwell into a pile of rubble, crushed the elevator mechanism, and ripped the exterior fire escape clean off the brick walls. They are completely trapped on the top floor, dozens of feet above the ground, with no way out. Just as the neighbors begin to panic, a loud, heavy thud echoes from the back bedroom. The bedroom door slowly creaks open. Ellie's corpse violently jerks back to life, standing upright with a sickening flexibility. The demon has fully taken over, transforming her into a deadite. With an unnatural, blinding speed, she lunges into the living room, launching a blood-soaked attack. She slashes Beth's leg with a weaponized fingernail and deeply scratches Bridget's arm before turning her fury on the neighbors. In a desperate, adrenaline-fueled scramble, Beth manages to push the laughing, thrashing Ellie out into the public hallway and slam the heavy apartment door shut, throwing the deadbolts. But the nightmare has only shifted locations. Left outside in the dimly lit corridor with the helpless neighbors, Ellie unleashes a relentless, gore-filled massacre. Through the door's tiny glass peephole, Danny, Bridget, and Cassie are forced to watch in absolute horror as their sweet, loving mother mercilessly butchers their neighbors, painting the hallway walls in deep crimson blood. Inside the barricaded apartment, the air is thick with the scent of copper and absolute terror. As the wet, sickening sounds of tearing flesh fade from the hallway, a devastating realization hits Danny. Cracking under the immense guilt and weight of the situation, he breaks down in tears and confesses to Beth that he found the hidden vault, opened the skin-bound book, and played the cursed phonograph records. Beth, furious and terrified, realizes that the answers to saving them must lie within those records. She rushes to Danny's room and frantically plays the remaining vintage discs. The crackling voice of Father Thomas returns, but it offers no hope. The priest reveals that his entire theological team was systematically destroyed by this ancient entity. The demon cannot be reasoned with, it cannot be bargained with, and it absolutely cannot be exorcised. The record delivers a grim, chilling truth. The only way to stop a deadite is total bodily destruction. Before Beth can even process this information, Ellie begins to play cruel, devastating psychological games from the other side of the door. Her voice flawlessly mimics her original sweet maternal tone, weeping and begging her babies to let her in because she's cold and scared. The entity specifically targets the youngest, sweetest child, Cassie. Standing right by the front door, Ellie whispers through the wood, manipulating Cassie's innocence. Overwhelmed by love for her mother, Cassie reaches up and slides the security chain lock open. But before she can completely open the door, Ellie violently thrusts her pale, clawed hand through the small gap, grabbing Cassie tightly by the neck. The trap is sprung, igniting a chaotic, terrifying scramble for survival. A frantic, bloody struggle erupts in the entryway. Beth throws her body against the door, fighting against Ellie's supernatural strength, and manages to pull Cassie back, just as Ellie's clawed hands snap at her face. With a desperate heave, Beth slams the door shut once more, jamming a heavy piece of furniture against it. But as they breathe a temporary sigh of relief, they quickly realize that the greatest danger isn't outside anymore. It's already inside with them. The deep scratch that Bridget received on her face from Ellie earlier begins to rapidly fester, the veins turning an unnatural, ink-black color right beneath her skin. Bridget's face drains of all color, her jaw slackens, and her eyes glaze over into an opaque, milky white. Suddenly, she doubles over and violently vomits a thick, black, highly corrosive fluid all over the floor. The demonic infection has completely claimed her. Bridget turns with a terrifying, sadistic hunger. She grabs a glass cup, shatters it with her teeth, and chews the shards with a sickening crunch, smiling as blood pours from her gums. She then corners Beth, wielding a common kitchen cheese grater, and forcefully drags it down Beth's leg, brutally shaving off layers of skin in a horrifying display of violence. The apartment becomes a chaotic war zone as Danny tries to hold back his possessed sister. In a desperate, blind act of self-defense to save her aunt, little Cassie grabs a wooden broom, snaps the handle into a sharp, jagged stake, and accidentally thrusts it forward. The sharp wood impales Bridget directly through the back of her open throat. Bridget's body goes limp, and she drops to the ground, seemingly dead once again. In the twisted, nightmarish reality of the evil dead, death is never a permanent escape. It is merely a cruel pause. As Danny and Beth stand over Bridget's body, weeping for the loss of the sweet teenage girl, her eyes snap open. Completely unfazed by the jagged wooden staff protruding directly from her throat, Bridget stands up with a sickening, liquid laugh. She grabs a knife and plunges it deep into her brother Danny's stomach. Danny collapses, bleeding heavily. Knowing his injuries are fatal, and seeing his sister fully transformed into a monster, Danny decides to use his very last ounces of strength to protect what is left of his family. He grabs a heavy bottle of rubbing alcohol, smashes it directly over Bridget's head, soaking her clothes, and strikes a lighter. Instantly, Bridget is engulfed in a roaring, bright orange inferno, screaming in demonic agony as she thrashes around the room. But there is absolutely no time to mourn Danny. At that exact same moment, a metallic scraping sound echoes from above. Ellie has used the building's old ventilation shafts to bypass the barricaded front door. She drops from the ceiling vent like a predatory insect, cornering a grieving, wounded Beth in the back bedroom. The demonic Ellie intensely mocks Beth's deepest, hidden secret, her pregnancy. She cackles, telling Beth she will be a terrible mother, before lunging forward and attempting to physically rip the unborn child directly out of Beth's stomach with her bare, clawed hands. Refusing to submit, Beth and Cassie team up, grabbing a pair of heavy, razor-sharp tailoring scissors and driving them into Ellie's body, temporarily incapacitating the monster long enough to run. With Danny dead and Ellie temporarily pinned down, Beth grips Cassie's hand tightly. They flee the ruined apartment, stepping into the blood-soaked, corpse-ridden hallway. Their only hope is to reach the broken elevator car and somehow use the shaft to descend to the ground level. But as they reach the center of the corridor, the air turns ice cold, and a low, rhythmic thudding sound echoes off the concrete. Suddenly, the dead bodies of Danny, Bridget, and all the slaughtered neighbors begin to twitch, rise, and crawl toward each other. In a sickening, bone-snapping display of absolute body horror, the entities begin to physically melt, tearing their own flesh apart to fuse their limbs, torsos, and faces, together with Ellie. Their bones crack and reform, combining into a towering, multi-limbed, grotesque monstrosity of pure flesh and nightmare known as the Marauder. This towering beast, sporting multiple screaming heads and swinging heavy fused limbs, roars with the collective voice of the damned. Beth and Cassie scramble into the broken elevator car, slamming the metal gate shut just as the Marauder lunges. The monster scales the outside of the elevator with terrifying speed, climbing onto the roof of the car. Its heavy claws slice through the thick steel ceiling, snapping the main suspension cables one by one. With a deafening snap, the elevator is cut loose. It plunges down the dark shaft in a spectacular, roaring torrent of blood that has filled the upper shafts, crashing violently into the concrete floor of the subterranean basement parking lot. The impact of the crash leaves the elevator car completely mangled, filled with a foot of pooling, dark blood. Coughing and battered, Beth and Cassie desperately crawl out of the wreckage, stepping into the dark, eerie shadows of the underground parking garage. But the nightmare has followed them down. The Marauder emerges from the elevator shaft, crawling along the ceiling and walls like a massive, flesh-woven spider. The beast moves with terrifying speed, cutting off their escape. With a heavy sweep of its multi-fused arm, the monster knocks Beth across the concrete floor, sending her sliding into the shadows. The Marauder then pins little Cassie down onto a wooden workbench, right beneath a heavy industrial chainsaw that had been left running by a maintenance crew. The buzzing, sharp metal blades vibrate inches away from Cassie's face. Channeling her inner warrior and refusing to let another family member die, Beth stumbles to her feet. She spots a double-barreled shotgun lying next to a dead security guard. She loads it, steps into the light, and fires a devastating blast directly into the center of the monster, blowing away several limbs and freeing Cassie from its grip. Beth immediately looks around for a permanent solution to end this curse. Her eyes land on a massive industrial wood chipper parked in the corner of the garage, its engine loudly idling. She realizes that total bodily destruction is their only way out. Beth lures the thrashing, roaring monster directly toward the machine. Holding her ground with the heavy chainsaw, Beth engages in a brutal, close-quarters battle with the creature, slicing through its corrupted flesh, while Cassie bravely reaches over and activates the wood chipper's intake switch. With a final triumphant scream, Beth uses the chainsaw to shove the entire, writhing mass of flesh, limbs, and screaming demonic faces directly into the spinning, industrial blades. The machine roars as it shreds the Marauder into a literal geyser of dark blood, bone fragments, and pulverized pulp, painting the entire garage in a thick coat of red. The deafening roar of the wood chipper slowly dies down, leaving only the quiet, rhythmic dripping of blood echoing through the dark garage. The ancient demonic entity has finally been torn apart, and the nightmare is over for Beth and Cassie. Covered from head to toe in blood, exhausted, and deeply traumatized, the surviving aunt and niece hold on to each other tightly for support. They turn away from the carnage and slowly walk up the concrete exit ramp of the parking garage, stepping out into the bright, warm, and peaceful light of the early morning sun, finally safe. But in the world of the evil dead, the curse is a perfect, uninterrupted circle. The timeline loops back exactly to where our story began. A few hours later, Jessica, a young woman who lives on an unaffected lower floor of the complex, cheerfully walks down into the parking garage, carrying her bags to head out for a planned weekend vacation at a serene lakeside cabin with her boyfriend and cousin. She steps into the horrific, silent scene, staring in utter confusion at the blood-splattered cars, the shredded remains, and the ancient, skin-bound book lying completely intact on the concrete floor. Before she can even process the horror or let out a single scream, the invisible, roaring demonic force swoops out of the darkness, violently slamming into her and instantly possessing her soul, setting up the exact, brutal lakeside massacre that opened our story.